Hello, and welcome to another personal perspective video. Picking up where the last one ended up, my interest in gaming. Now, for this one, the last one was rather short. As for me, there really wasn't much to talk about in the early interest in gaming. Well, Pac-Man Arcade, then the video game crash. And while yes, I realized that there were home consoles, Atari 2600, ColecoVision, and television, Commodore 64, computer, console. There were consoles at the time, but no one I knew had one, and the Atari was too expensive, so I just never really cared. My interest in video games came and went, like I said in the end of the last video, until Christmas 1987 when we got a Nintendo NES for Christmas, and I took to that real fast with Super Mario and Duck Hunt combo cart that came with it. But January into February, February into March, and as March 1988 rolled through, getting tired of the endless linearity of Castlevania, Ghosts and Goblins, Kid Icarus. Good games, but the linearity, was always the same levels in the same order, same enemies in the same patterns, same every time you played the game. And by the spring of 1988, like I said at the ending of the last video, I had had enough. And just when I was about ready to give up on video games yet again, a friend I had been talking to a couple days earlier comes in with a copy of a game he had just bought. Pops that into the Nintendo, hands me the controller, and says, "Yeah, you think all video games are linear? Well, try this one." So, type in my name, select that file, push start. Instantly, my interest in video games is saved. What a concept. An open world, well, as open world as an 80s game could be, where you can do things in different orders, where no two playthroughs have to be the exact same thing. Instantly saving my fledgling interest in video games. So, yeah. And with that, welcome to The Legend of Zelda, in my perspective on the games as they came out. Granted, this one, by April of 1988, had been out for about a half to 3/4 of a year, released in August of 1987 in North America. But I had never played it until then. Instantly loved it and have played it more than any other game in the entirety of gaming history since. Of course, there's not a whole lot to add to this that hasn't been said before by other people or even me when I did a complete playthrough of the game, both quests from my channel earlier this year. The first Zelda game I played, and the only Zelda game that existed at the time I played it for the first time. Of course, it wasn't exactly childhood, as I was already 16 by then, so... Yeah. Of course, when I did my playthrough of the game for the channel earlier this year, it was only going to be a brief review. But as I started talking about it and kept playing it, I just couldn't put the controller down. Just how much I love this game. How you can do things in pretty much any order. I mean, granted, there are limitations, like you need the raft from level 3 to even get to level 4, or you need the ladder from level 4 to complete a lot of the later dungeons past that. So it wasn't totally open world, but as close to it as an 80s game could be. And historically, this was the game that helped that transition from arcade-style gaming, where it's all about getting the high score or getting through the game as fast before the timer hits 0. From that kind of gameplay, showing that games could be more than just that. This game was instrumental in that too, so historically it has its merits as well. But again, yeah, there's not much else I could say about this game that I didn't already in my playthrough of it. So, yeah. Of course, in December of 1988, about 9 months later, came the second game in Zelda release order, the often hated and ridiculed Zelda 2. And yes, it was different than the first game before it. No doubt about that. It was more platformer, borrowing RPG-esque elements of experience levels. But, I mean, that's the same argument people like to use in recent days about Breath of the Wild, how it's so much different than the typical Zelda. To which I say good, every once in a while change is needed. Too much of anything can get repetitive and boring after a while, no matter how good it might be. Just, like the analogy I sometimes give. Take your favorite song, whatever it might be for you, and listen to nothing but that song for 24 straight hours. You get sick of it after a while. Doesn't mean you don't like that song, just means you don't want to hear it. You've heard it enough for a while. Well, there you go. Linear games can be good, but when that's all there is, and for Zelda, if every game was like the first game, then why bother making anymore? Just let people replay the first game over and over again to the end of time. You're not going to try anything different. So, yeah. But again, like the first game, I did a complete playthrough of this game for my channel already. There's not much more I can add to it now than I did then. So. Suffice to say, I still, like I said then, don't think this game deserves half the hatred it gets. It's different, yes, but that's not always a bad thing. Sometimes change is needed. Anyways, of course, there were no new Zelda games for 1989, 1990, or 1991. At least not here in America. I mean, there was the BS Zelda in Japan, but that was just that in Japan. That never made its way to North America. So as the 80s ended and the new decade began, there were no new Zelda games, which for me, looking back at it historically, was probably a good thing, because if there was 1989, 1990, who would have had time to play Dragon Quest or Final Fantasy? I would have been too busy playing the new Zelda game. Yeah. So. And as for this game, like I said in my playthrough, the only thing that really bugs me about this game is how when you die and get a game over screen, you start back at North Castle starting point, and you lose all of your experience points. Both things that could be improved upon if they ever do a remake of this game. But anyways, the third Zelda game in release order for the Super Nintendo in April of 1992. A Link to the Past. The Super Nintendo console had been out since August of 1991, but I had never bought one or really cared to. I was happy with the NES. They were still making good games for it. It would into 1994, so. But when this game came out, well, that was my incentive to buy a Super Nintendo. I mean, it's a Zelda game, come on. Of course, it also helped that it came out in April. Tax return check money for that year, so I had extra spending money, so that helped too. Yeah, bought the Super Nintendo and a copy of this game and loved it. I mean, I would still consider this the best Super Nintendo game had it not been for a game released 2 years later called Super Metroid, also on the SNES. Yeah. Second best out of all the great Super Nintendo games isn't bad either. So. Of course, historically, this game started a lot of the traditions that have become common in Zelda. Hard pieces instead of just hard containers. The Master Sword. Dual worlds for better or worse. With the light world and dark world. So many Zelda games following it would have that mechanic to the point of annoyance, in my opinion, but I'll get to that later. The cracked bomb walls. The first hint at hand-holding in Zelda to come. I mean, I'm sorry. I know a lot of Zelda fans love that. considered a vast improvement over the original, where it was all up to trial and error and for you to find out yourself. But I liked that. It didn't feel as, I mean, it actually felt rewarding when you found those. Unlike recent Zelda games, starting with this one, where you didn't find it, you were told right where it was with the cracked wall icon. Yeah, I mean, I do love this game. Easily one of the better games ever made. But for better or worse, its impact can still be seen today in some regard or another. But overall, easily one of the better Zelda games in my opinion, and if you haven't played it yet, I think you should if you're a Zelda fan. I mean, it's on the 3DS Virtual Console if you have a 3DS, and it's on Switch and SNES Online, so not too hard to find a copy of it these days. So, yeah. Of course, I still got to redo my playthrough of this game. I recorded several videos, but the audio quality wasn't all that good, or the video in some cases, or sometimes both. So yeah, there's no way I could upload those videos as they are. So yeah, and ow, a lot of damage. Ow, yeah. And as you can see, enemies here do a lot of damage, so it's definitely one of the harder Zelda games. At least it can be. Of course, I wasn't playing too cautiously there, just kind of, you know, mimicking gameplay for the sake of the video. But yeah, this game can be brutal at times if you're not used to that, so that could be a turn off, so to speak. But again, overall, a Zelda game I would definitely recommend trying out if you haven't already. Of course, the next Zelda game following this, the fourth Zelda game in release order, August 1993, for the Game Boy, was Link's Awakening. Good game, but it was the first Zelda game that I did not play for a long time to come. Not because I didn't like the game, but wasn't too particularly fond of the console it was for, in this case, the original Game Boy. Well, it earns its place in history for being a major pioneer in handheld gaming at the time, blah, blah, blah. Just personally, something to be said for that little tiny, 2-inch by 2-inch square black and white screen. Always gave me a headache if I played games on it for more than an hour at a time. Happened every time, so it couldn't have been just a coincidence. So yeah, as good as some of the games may have been, I just never got into them because of that. This was one of them. Wasn't until years later on computer emulation that I was finally able to play this in a way that didn't give me headaches. Once I did, I realized how good the game is. Granted, it was the start of truly linear Zelda, which to me is always a turn down, turn off, or let down. I mean, nothing against linear Zelda in theory, but again, as I've said before, even on this video, the first Zelda game restored my interest in video games because of the open world. Had the first Zelda game been as linear as this one, I wouldn't even care about Zelda or video games in general for that matter. Would have given up on video games as I was inclined to do anyways in April of '88. So yeah, that's why linear Zelda to me will always be a sticking point, so to speak. It was the open world of the first Zelda game that, I made my point moving on. Of course, this would be the last Zelda game for 5 years to come. At the time, the longest gap between Zelda games ever. Of course, it no longer holds that honor. But not that that's an honor, but it no longer holds that title. Breath of the Wild. Then, Anyways, of course, the next Zelda game following this one. Oh boy. Cool. Of course, Following Link's Awakening, the fifth Zelda game in release order, out on the N64 on November 23rd, 1998, Ocarina of Time, one of the big four, for lack of a better way of putting that. Not trying to rip on the thrash metal band Big Four kind of thing, but the reason I say that is because in Zelda circles it usually boils down to one of four games. This one, Wind Waker, Twilight Princess, or Spirit Tracks as to what that particular gamer's favorite Zelda game is. Henceforth the Big Four. But anyways, yeah. This being one of them. Ocarina of Time. In my opinion, it's not only the best Zelda, but the best video game of all time. Period. Of course, as I hinted at in the last video, so many people I hear have such high regards for this is because it's childhood nostalgia. What childhood? I was already 27 by then, or because it was the first Zelda game they played. For me, that was the first one when it was still relatively brand new. So yeah, just something about this game, the music, the dungeons, the gameplay, the first 3D Zelda game, all combined into one, made this game stand out above all of the others at that point. And aside from the first Zelda game, it's the one that I've replayed most often. Whether on the N64 or the 3DS. Of course, when I did the playthrough of the game for my channel, I did the 3DS remake for convenience. But the soundtrack here is awesome. Of course, a lot of Zelda games that can be said for, but for me personally, this was the Zelda game, or this was the game that, up until this point, like I believe I've said in other videos, I would always turn the sound down on my TV and let whatever game out, whatever rock album I was into at that point in time, play that, and that'd be my music for the gameplay. But when the day I started playing this game, I wasn't in the mood to dig out my CDs and decide what album to put on, so I just played the music in the game. Was introduced to the quirky yet cheerful Kokiri Forest. So yeah. And ever since then, I've gone back and played some of those older games like Super Metroid and A Link to the Past and wondered why I didn't give that music a chance earlier, but yeah. Of course, while A Link to the Past started the dual worlds mechanic of Light World, Dark World that would often be replicated in many Zelda games to come, this game started the companion character crap that would be replicated in many games to come. Much to my dislike. I mean, at least with this game, like I said in my playthrough of it, there's some justification for Navi's existence in this world. This being the first 3D Zelda game, making the transition from 2D to 3D gaming meant a whole lot of new control functions had to be explained somehow. And Navi, or Navi, however you pronounce her name, I've heard it pronounced both ways, was how developers saw fit to do so. Helpful on the first playthrough, but annoying as crap in any later playthroughs, yes. But again, at least there was some justification, historically speaking, for Navi's very existence. Tattle in Majora's Mask, I guess they figured not a lot of people had played Ocarina of Time yet. But, yeah, more about that later. Trust me, we'll get into that later. But for now, of course, the next Zelda game to follow this one was the DX Color remaster of Link's Awakening, making it the first Zelda game to get a remake or remaster. First of many to follow, but yeah. I didn't play that one initially either because Game Boy Color, it's just an extension or slight upgrade of the Game Boy. But so again, I missed out on Link's Awakening then too. The next Zelda game following that, the next new Zelda game, Came out on the N64 as well in October of 2000, nearly 2 years after Ocarina. Majora's Mask, a game that I did get eventually and play. Well, I did get right away and play, but it took a while to start liking. This game was a little weird in my opinion at the time. Well, with the introduction to Tingle, the Deku form, and a lot of different elements. You know, I didn't get too far in this game and quickly gave up on it. Much to my upset now. Didn't go back and play it until a few years later. But once I did, I realized how good a game it is. Granted, it's more side quest and collection oriented, with only 4 main dungeons. But 52 heart pieces more than any other Zelda game to this day that I can think of. Anyways, good game, even though I may not have realized it at the time, till a few years later. Didn't like it the first time playing it in 2000, early 2001, and quickly wrote it aside. Following Majora's Mask, the next Zelda game, or games plural, would be a pair of them for the Game Boy Color in May of 2001, Oracle of Ages and Oracle of Seasons. Both great games, although Ages to me is just slightly better. Co-developed by Capcom. The attention to detail with those passwords, complete one game and get a password into the next to carry over story and item. The amount of detail in that is just amazing, especially for a Game Boy Color handheld game. Most major console titles don't get that kind of. Of course, some would argue it's just a gimmick to make you buy both games, which I say is bunk because both games can be completed separately without even playing the other one. So yeah, try again, Buster. Yeah. Of course, again, they were games I didn't play right away because I never had a Game Boy Color. Games I never played until nearly a decade later with emulation. And again, I know you're not supposed to do that, blah, blah, blah. But yeah. Of course, nowadays I have them on my 3DS Virtual Console, so if I ever want to play them again, there's that. And again, I would recommend if any Zelda fans that haven't played these games, I would recommend you do so. And again, they're on 3DS Virtual Console, so if you have a 3DS, there you go. I mean, if you don't have a 3DS, then I don't know. With today's retro gaming prices, I don't know if it's a good idea to buy one either. But if you do have a reasonable financial way of playing them, I would suggest doing so. They are good games, at least in my opinion. Granted, they carry over the dual worlds mechanic that by this point was starting to get just a little stale, in my opinion. Both Ages having the past and present, both world maps being slightly different. And Oracle of Seasons having the surface world and the underground of Subrosia. So yeah, by this point that whole dual worlds mechanic that Link to the Past was starting to get a little stale and moldy. But they were still good games, and I was still at that point in time willing to give the stagnant idea a pass and overlook the stench of mold. At least for the time being. Of course, technically speaking, following the Oracle games was the Game Boy Advance A Link to the Past remaster port that went along with Four Swords, the first Zelda multiplayer game. And multiplayer, that's all you need to know. I haven't played it, or intend to. multiplayer. That's all you need to know. They may be good, but if you don't have anyone to play them with, what's the sense of having the game? Multiplayer, that's all you need to know. I haven't played it. The next Zelda game after that, another one of the so-called Big Four, that is so many fans' favorite game, one or the other, The Wind Waker, on the GameCube in 2003. I started playing this game, but much to my upset and embarrassment and annoyance now, looking back at it, this was also at that time when I eh, got tired of the way video game companies, Nintendo and Sony, would both come out with a new console, the NES, the SNES, the N64, the PS1, the PS2, come out with a new console, promote the crap out of it for the next 5, 6 years, and then ceremoniously kick it to the curb in favor of its successor. By the beginning of 2000, by the beginning of 2005, well, actually more like mid 2003, I was fed up with that so much so that I sold in a, and I regret this more than you can begin to understand. Nowadays, looking back at it, a bit of juvenile whining on my part. Sold my GameCube. Yeah, I know. I cringe myself when I think about it. You couldn't possibly. Yeah. So yeah, like screw you, gaming industry. You think I got money to waste on a console every 5, 6 years? Well, I don't. So I never bought the Wii, the Wii U. For the first couple years of its existence, I didn't buy a Switch either. Never bought a PS3 or a PS4 or so far a PS5. Xbox, never got into that console at all. And again, I do regret that looking back at it, as between the three companies, I missed out on a lot of good games. Yeah. But it is what it is, as the old saying goes, what's done is done and can't be undone. But yeah, point being, because of my stupidity, because of my crybaby antics, I barely started this game before why I sold my GameCube wasn't actually out of that. It was because I needed money for something else. But yeah, kept my N64 though. And due to the lack of not being able to play this game was when I went back and replayed Majora's Mask, like I said earlier, finally getting into that game. So something good came out of it, I guess. Never did get to finish this game, but I earned an appreciation for Majora's Mask in its absence. Of course, for anyone who cares, by the end of this year or early into next year, I will be doing a blind playthrough of this game after the Oracle games, Minish Cap, and A Link to the Past. So yeah, probably won't be until early next year, actually. But so yeah, for anybody who likes blind playthroughs, well, there you go. Finally sat down and played this game after, well, by then, even closer to 20 years later. So yeah, but as of right now, what little I know about it is from what I've read in Hyrule and Zelda Encyclopedia, or certain theory videos from YouTubers like Zeltech, which isn't a whole lot, and preferably I'd like to keep it that way until I get a chance to play the game. I only know that it's a sequel to Ocarina of Time in one of the timeline branch-offs. But anyways, of course, technically the next game following the Wind Waker and Zelda release order was the other Four Swords game, Four Swords Adventures. But again, I haven't played it. Multiplayer, that's all you need to know. I haven't played it. I mean, again, if you're into multiplayer games, to each their own. You're right to your opinion, but again, they're only good if you can find someone willing to play them with you. And if you can't, then what's the sense in having the game? And I've been told that the second rather, Four Swords game did have a single player option, but from what I've also heard, that was so clunky and unresponsive that it wasn't even worth playing. At least that's what I've heard. So, yeah. Either way, I've never played either of the two Four Swords games. Of course, one thing that I've always found weird about that is that both, the first one and the second one, featuring the Vati character and the Four Sword item. But the next Zelda game in release order in January of '05 in North America, the Minish Cap, the ultimate handheld Zelda game in my opinion, to this day. Well, unless you count Breath of the Wild in the handheld department, since the Switch does double as a handheld portable device, but it's also a console, so that's kind of an open argument there. Whereas the Game Boy Advance didn't double as a console, so yeah, it was truly portable. But yeah, the Minish Cap, a prequel storyline wise to the two Four Swords games, showing the origins of the Vati character and the Four Sword item. And this is another game that I will be doing a playthrough of for my channel right after the two Oracle games and A Link to the Past, or maybe even before A Link to the Past, I don't know. Of course, I went over that in my future plans video about 10 days ago now, so yeah. Of course, while I do love this game and its soundtrack, its gameplay for the most part, but there are two major strikes against this game. One, whether it's the Minish size world or the normal size world, this game in an odd sort of way continued the dual worlds mechanic that was started to get stagnant fast. And two, like Ocarina of Time with Navi, Majora's Mask with Tattle, this game had Ezlo. Yeah. And Ezlo, as I was saying, companion character. For the love of insert your own analogy, why Nintendo? I mean, at least like I said earlier with Ocarina of Time and Navi, there was some justification for her existence, with Ocarina being the first 3D Zelda game. And with the next one, Majora's Mask, only 2 years later, a lot of people might not have played Ocarina yet, so. But here, in a 2D, top-down, traditional Zelda, there's no need for a companion character, other than Nintendo's obsession with that gimmick, and the desire of all developers in modern days to overly coddle gamers. Bullshit. By this point, the whole companion character was beyond, was in my opinion, beyond stagnant. I loved this game, but I still cringe every time I think of Ezlo. So yeah, great game, but why Nintendo? Why? Of course, the next game in release order, another one of the so-called Big Four, that either Ocarina of Time, Wind Waker, or Twilight Princess. Yeah, that game. And this is where I irritate a lot of fans. A very unpopular opinion in Zelda circles, but I hate the game Twilight Princess. Played it once at a friend's house, who was nice enough to let me try to play through the whole game. Didn't get very far before I realized it had the dual world mechanic and the companion character. The mold was stagnant. And that's where I started to lose interest in Zelda games. Didn't even play the next two games initially for years to come, Phantom Hourglass and Spirit Tracks, both on the DS. Both are okay games, as I would later realize. Both a little stylus pen crazy, which is okay, but if you don't have the stylus, you have to use your fingertips, or or whatever you can find to substitute for it. But yeah. The following game after those two was the other of the made for Skyward Sword for the Wii and the Wiimote. As if that wasn't enough to keep me away from the game. Fee and this time shift stones equaling another dual world Zelda game. Good God, Nintendo, why? Why so many dual world Zeldas? Why so many companion characters? Doesn't the crap ever get old? I mean, I know fans love it, and I'm very much in the minority here. I get that. That's fine. Unpopular opinion. But, yeah. I mean, the Wiimote thing was corrected with the HD remaster of Skyward Sword last year for the Switch. But still, you have the companion character and the dual worlds that, again, get kind of boring. So, yeah. There were a few remasters in there. The 3DS remake of Ocarina of Time in 2011. The Wii U remaster of Wind Waker in 2013. Likewise, the Wii U remake of Twilight Princess in 2016. But remakes and remasters aside, the next major Zelda game was released on both the Wii U and the then brand new Switch in April, or rather March 2017, Breath of the Wild. Granted, I'd heard a lot about the game and wanted to play it, but it was on the Switch, so for the first few years of its existence, I didn't. Until about 3 years later in early 2020, when I heard Final Fantasy VII was also on the Switch. That was my motivation for buying one, and along with downloading a digital copy of Final Fantasy VII, got Breath of the Wild earlier that day, and loved it ever since. Much deserved, much long awaited major console return to open world Zelda. Linearity and companion characters and dual world mechanics gone with you. Thank God for favors. Finally, a Zelda game that had neither dual worlds, companion characters, or linearity. A breath, if you'll pardon the term, of fresh air, in my opinion. Yeah. After so many games, that had either the dual world, light world, dark world, Hyrule, low rule, past, present, young Link, adult Link, Hyrule, Twilight Realm, Surface World, Hollow Drum. Yeah. So many Zelda games having the dual world mechanic in some format or another, and or a companion character. Yeah. Breath of the Wild has neither. Thank frickin' God for favors. So, yeah. Instantly a better game than we'd seen in Zelda history just for those two reasons alone. I mean, if I'm being completely fair and honest and unbiased, the shrines are kind of repetitive, being that there's 120 of them, and a lot of them are just combat with guardians or blessing shrines that you have to complete a quest to get into. And even then, once you do, it's just one treasure chest in the middle and the orb at the end. Big deal. Kind of repetitive. The only thing is you don't have to go to any of them outside the 4 on the plateau. Once you get off the Great Plateau, you can completely ignore the shrines from then on out. So you don't have to go through them. Yeah. That, the weapons breaking, and climbing in the rain are about the only 3 real issues I have with Breath of the Wild. Otherwise, as close to perfection as any game of the 21st century has ever come so far. The only other game of the last 22 years that I can think of that even begins to rival Breath of the Wild would be Dragon Quest XI. As far as games of the last 22 years, aka the 21st century, is concerned. Which, of course, brings me to the new game coming out next year. Breath of the Wild 2 no longer, Tears of the Kingdom. Everything else about the game can be overlooked. I just hope that 1, it continues the overworld or the open world that Breath of the Wild returned Zelda to, and that we don't have a companion character mode. From the looks of it, we're going to have in some form or another the dual worlds. That much seems to be obvious from the trailers we've seen so far. Because it looks like you're going to have the world map from the first game, and then you're going to have those sky islands. So in that regard, it looks like it's going to be a return to the Skyward Sword format of Skyloft and Surface World. To some regard or another, yeah, it looks like that mechanic is going to be returning, much to my dislike there, but as long as it's still open world like Breath of the Wild 1 is, I can overlook the dual worlds. And as long as there's no companion characters. Of course, I'd like how they reworked the Lionel and the Hynix for Breath of the Wild. I'd like to see them do that with some of the other older Zelda enemies and bosses like Gleeok. Gleeok was used like 3 times in the first game as a boss or mini-boss. But then, aside from his brief appearance as the boss of Level 7 Explorer's Crypt in Oracle of Seasons, we haven't really seen Gleeok in a main series Zelda game since. I mean, you could argue Minish Cap boss of the Cave of Flames Level 2 was Gleerock, kind of a derivative of Gleeok. Sort of, but only had the 1 head instead of 3 or 4. Or in the side game spin-off Cadence of Hyrule, you had Gleeok and Spiel. But again, that was just a side game spin-off crossover with Crypt of the Necrodancer, aka Cadence of Hyrule. So yeah, haven't seen Gleeok return in the main series Zelda game in over 20 years now, since Oracle of Seasons. He's long overdue. Give Gleeok the Lionel Breath of the Wild treatment. Imagine seeing him in a 3D game like the Lionels. Good God, that could be intimidating just thinking about it. Or another enemy that we haven't seen too much of in Zelda games, the Daira from Zelda 2. You know, the ones that either toss axes at you or swing them at you in Death Mountain in Zelda 2. Those guys, they haven't been back in a Zelda game that I know of since Zelda 2. I mean, you could argue that the Zelfos are kind of a spin-off of that enemy since, you know, they kind of look alike in an odd sort of way, but or another Zelda enemy of games of old that, well, they existed in most of the Zelda games, but as someone, I can't remember who it is, someone had already mentioned online on YouTube, ever since Ocarina of Time, the Zoras have been friendly. We haven't seen an enemy Zora since what? Link's Awakening or the Oracle games? Bring back the enemy Zora. You know, the ones that used to spit rocks at you from rivers and lakes in the original early Zeldas. Or another enemy that hasn't been used too often in recent Zelda games of the last 20 years. The Pole's Voice. You know, those rabbit mice looking things from the first game that you needed, that arrows, you know, secret power is said to be in the arrows. I mean, they were an oracle of ages and seasons, but since then, in the last 20 years, haven't seen too much of them. Bring them back in 3D style. A lot of old enemies that have been kind of ignored over the years. So, you know, they can do what they did with the Lionel and the Hynix in Breath of the Wild. There's a lot more enemies they could give that same treatment for in Tears of the Kingdom. Oh yeah. Or just, you know, introduce new enemies. I mean, that's another one of the common gripes with Breath of the Wild that I can kind of agree on. As much as I love that game, enemy variety was kind of lacking. I mean, we're talking about a game released in 2017. You had a game 31 years earlier in 1986, the first Zelda game, had a bigger enemy variety. Yes, I actually did a little list and a little bit of thought, and yes, the original Zelda game has more different enemy variety, including dungeon exclusive enemies and bosses. Still, the original Zelda game has more enemy variety than Breath of the Wild does. Kind of ridiculous when you think about it, but sadly true. So yeah, whether it's bringing back old enemies that have been ignored for years, if not decades, or just introducing new ones like the Guardians in Breath of the Wild, one way or the other or both, have more enemies. I mean, yes, you had the difficulty tier, blue and red, you know, going all the way back to the first game. Still, but like I said before, all those other things I can ignore and overlook, as long as A, Tears of the Kingdom is an open world as Breath of the Wild was, and 2, there's no companion characters. Good God, we've had enough of that in Zelda games past. Don't need any more. Thank you very much, Nintendo. Yeah. And again, if I'm being completely fair and honest, I do kind of hope that they bring back the traditional dungeons in Tears of the Kingdom. The shrines were, you know, kind of an interesting substitute, but like I was just saying earlier in this video, considering there's 120 of them, they got a little redundant by the end of the game. Especially being that so many of them were combat shrines, or blessing shrines. bring back the original, the early dungeons. Doesn't have to be exact replicas of them, but Spirit Temple or Stone Tower Temple. Part of Zelda was always the dungeons. Kind of missed that in Breath of the Wild. As great a game as it was at its core, so to speak, there were things about the game that could have been better. But, we'll have just wait and see when Tears of the Kingdom comes out next year. Only thing I can absolutely guarantee is that for the first time in years, I will be there to buy it the day of its release. Guaranteed. Yeah. No questions asked, no doubt about it. I will be buying it the very day of its release. Haven't done that for a Zelda game in, God, I can't remember. It's actually a good question. When was the last Zelda game I actually bought the day of release? I mean, the first game was already out for quite some time before I even knew it existed. Zelda 2, I was already a fan, but yeah. Like I've said in many videos and Twitch streams before, at that point in time, 1988, most of my extra spending money was going for the hard rock era that was still alive and well. Rat, Motley Crue, Stryper, Dokken, Twisted Sister, etc., etc. Whether it was concert tour tickets, concert tour t-shirts, cassette copies of the latest albums, Metal Edge magazine, or one way or the other, most of my extra spending money was going to that. So most of my gameplay was restricted to rental time, Zelda 2 being no exception initially. Yeah. Thinking about it, the last game I bought shortly after its release initially was A Link to the Past, 30 years ago now. Yeah. I mean, I'd play them all shortly after release, but not right away the day of its. I mean, even the greatest game of them all, Ocarina of Time, wasn't until early 1990, got an N64 with my tax return check that spring. Even by then, that's when I'd buy my consoles, when I had all that extra money to work with. And the game had already been out for a few months by then, so even the greatest game ever made, I didn't get the day of its release. So yeah, Tears of the Kingdom will be the first game in years. Frick, I'm even tempted to pre-order the game as soon as it's possible to do so. Point being, I'm more psyched for that game than you can begin to imagine. The sequel to one of my 4 favorite games of all time, and easily my favorite game of this century so far. 3 words sum up that whole situation. I can't wait. Anyways, that's about it for this video. The Zelda series, as it's been in my initial thoughts on those games. And to be completely fair, before Twilight Princess fans rip me into rear end for dissing their favorite game, while I didn't like it initially, I am open to replaying the game, either on emulation or hopefully maybe someday fans will get their wish and Nintendo will re-release the HD version on Switch. One way or the other, I'm open to replaying the game and giving it another shot. Before I completely write the game aside. I mean, frick, for the longest time I hated Dragon Warrior 2. Yeah. Played that game again recently and actually liked it, so yeah. I am open for the idea of replaying Twilight Princess and actually giving the game a decent try, Yeah. But as of right now, that's not going to happen anytime soon. Between the Oracle games, A Link to the Past, Minish Cap, and if I can ever get OBS to capture it, a mountain of Zelda classic fan games. Lost Isle, Isle of the Winds, Balance of Nature. So yeah. While I won't completely say no to replaying Twilight Princess, it won't be anytime soon. But in the meantime, my thoughts on it are based entirely on initial thoughts. Just another game with dual worlds and a companion character. Good God, get it out of my face. Anyways, I just thought I'd clarify that since Twilight Princess is the favorite game of so many Zelda fans I've either known personally or talked to over the internet. Yeah. Before you go roasting me into a-hole for ripping on your favorite game, keep in mind it's just my opinion. Just because I don't agree with you doesn't mean... Hopefully you can keep it civilized in the comments. After all, it is just video game opinions. We don't have to agree to be friends, so to speak. Do you always agree with your friends in real life on everything? No, probably not. Do you like them any less for it? No, probably not. So yeah. I just never cared for Twilight Princess. I might if I replay. Anyway, point made. Now I'm digressing. Something serious. So yeah, that's about it for this video. Thanks for watching and putting up with my rants as I go through the Zelda history as it's been so far. Hope you at least moderately enjoyed the video and that you can keep the comments civilized, remembering that it's just video game and video game opinions. No need to get all bent out of shape over it. See ya for the next video in this series. Yeah, the next video in this series, where I go over the history of another one of my favorite video game franchises of all time, Dragon Quest, aka known originally here in North America as Dragon Warrior. My introduction to RPGs and its latest entry, as I said before, the only game that can even come close to rivaling Breath of the Wild for my pick of game of this century so far. So yeah, the next video in this series, Dragon Quest Dragon Warrior. See you then. Thanks for watching and bye.